The Winnipeg Jets are finally welcoming a captain, so we can stop wondering who's got the C. Adam Lowry will be donning the vaunted letter for the Jets this coming year, and honestly, you really couldn't find many better candidates for the role of captain and the ultimate leader on this Jets locker room. We'll dive into what makes Lowry a great candidate and who else was in the running on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But more than anything, we just really love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 emergency antibiotics that treat over 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. Now, like I said on tonight's episode, we're going to dive into the captaincy. This has always been something that, the Jets typically didn't struggle with. I mean, Wheeler has, been the captain for a while. Ladd was the captain for a bit. The Jets generally didn't have many questions about the leadership of the team. But you know the story as well as I do that the past couple of years, things took a turn. Wheeler had his captaincy stripped last year, and it was probably more of a symbolic thing. I think it allowed some face saving, and I think it also was the Jets kind of hitting at least publicly facing, a bit of a reset, right? You want to have a locker room that's on good terms, guys who get along, and you want the leadership to be accountable. So the whole, shebang about removing the C, look, let's be real. In terms of like practical implications and what it had, this sort of impacts it had on a day-to-day routine basis, probably not as much as the Jets maybe wanted it to seem like. But look, make no mistake, the whole move definitely had some real implications for the locker room dynamics and kind of a bit of a changing of the guard. Now, the selection this year is interesting, right? Adam Lowry is the new captain. They had a little press conference. They announced it publicly. And, for me, it was like a 2-horse race. It was either Lowry or Morrissey. And if I'm being honest, I did personally kind of have my heart set on Morrissey, but Lowry is also a very good choice. Now, I know that there's going to be some folks who are going to say, well, that's probably going to mean he's likely to play above his kind of station in terms of what he brings on the ice, right? Lowry is like an elite fourth liner, but, when he's wearing the C, you do wonder if he's maybe going to get a few extra minutes. Honestly, I mean, there's a lot of things that I can complain about, and I'm not really going to be that upset about this, so long as it doesn't become like a situation where he's anchoring the second line or something. Obviously Lowry is the kind of guy who, in those matchup situations where you want him to shut down opposing lines, I think that's where he's really effective. Maybe not so much trying to create offense and stuff, but off the ice or I guess in other areas where, maybe scoring isn't the most important thing, Lowry is a very good choice for captain because, his personality makes a lot of sense as a fit for this role. He has a lot of respect from the room in terms of like community initiatives and a lot of the stuff that the Jets have been promoting recently. Lowry is, more frequently been one of the front-facing players on this team involved with it. So I feel like when it comes to candidate choices, obviously I did want Morrissey to be the captain. I felt like he had really earned it, but I also feel that Lowry is another guy who really earned it. I mean, you really couldn't go wrong with either player. It was just kind of a matter of personal preference and who you thought really should wear the C. Obviously, there were maybe one or two other candidates, but I always felt that whoever else it would have been, it was a pretty distant, like third or fourth choice. So Lowry, obviously we're happy to welcome him as captain. It'll be interesting to see how he does things and how he wants to not really run the room, but I suppose lead this team, right? I think when you wear that C, you answer a lot more questions about accountability, about ability, how your season performance is going. And, I know that Lowry has been one of the guys that's pretty front facing when it comes to interviews. I'd be curious to know how he does with some of the increased pressure from the media. I feel like over the past couple of years, the Jets media and outlets that cover Winnipeg have been a lot more openly critical or questioning of how the team has handled things and how some of the players have responded to all of that. So Lowry's well versed. I think he's a great choice when it comes to the media. He handles it very well, and I think the added pressure of that letter on his chest is not going to be something that holds him back. I think he's going to keep kind of doing business as usual, and I think he's also going to be the kind of guy that you want standing up for you. Adam has always been one to jump into the fray when there's been scrums and trouble on the ice. I think in a lot of ways he's just honestly, one of the two most ideal candidates on the team. Now, like I said, if I had to choose, I kind of felt like Morrissey maybe paid his dues and maybe served as a really good bridge between young and old. You've got this amazingly skilled player who has really kind of turned his career around. He's blossomed into this elite offensive defenseman, but he's also a guy who's like really well respected by the room and, is again, another very front-facing player for a lot of what the Jets want to do. But Lowry, I mean, like I said, you really couldn't go wrong. He's a very sensible choice, and I'm interested to see how he does this season just because now there's going to be a lot more pressure on him not only to perform, but to be a leader. And I think he'll handle it well. I'm excited to see how he does and what he wants to accomplish this year. It'd be nice if he could bag a few extra goals alongside of that. A couple of years ago, he had, one of those offensive outputs that really was a little bit surprising for a guy who traditionally doesn't score a lot. So maybe the C gives him scoring powers this year. Now, of course, Lowry's captaincy is just one part of this offseason picture. And, Winnipeg's upcoming season, there is a challenging road ahead. We'll dive into why the Jets should be excited to meet it and why they might be a little bit, I would say, uncertain about the road ahead in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected, and especially for those of you who might be travelers, those who are frequent flyers, this is especially relevant for you. Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind so that you're not just hoping that you have access to medications in an emergency. You've got something on hand that's convenient, that's easy to store, and that comes with 5 very commonly used antibiotics for a number of different ailments. Stuff like diarrhea, a number of other things that you might encounter when you're traveling, especially maybe you come across a natural disaster or you just have a close encounter with some perhaps unsavory food poisoning. That's why Jase Medical wants to make sure you have all of the medications you need on hand. And of course, it's very easy. Jase handles everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared and save more than $360 right now by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using Locked On at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com with promo code Locked On at checkout. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode as we dive into, the Jets captaincy announcement of Adam Lowry and ultimately, what actually lies ahead for the Jets. Winnipeg is mostly taking care of a lot of the offseason business. I say mostly. Obviously, there's 2 very large pieces that still remain outstanding, and that's Scheifele and Hellebuyck. And we all know it's not getting resolved anytime soon. At least there was some movement on Hellebuyck last week or earlier this week where it seemed maybe Hellebuyck was rethinking his decision to not re-sign with the Jets. I do feel like at the end of the day, somehow there's going to be some sort of an extension. I'm also curious to know how Scheifele's feeling, right? Because Mark is one of those guys who will follow a team to the ends of the earth if he feels like the direction and leadership is there. But last year, we saw that he kind of went from really buying into it to not really following it in the second half. And it didn't seem like he was all that on board with how things were going. So I would say his status is still up in the air. But aside from that, the Jets have, I would say, a lot of risk this year and a lot of opportunity. We'll start off with the risk. This year, obviously, the Jets are trying to play this really difficult game of being competitive and keeping everyone, ready to go, while also having to accept the fact that Hellebuyck and Scheifele are at risk of walking for nothing. And I think for the Jets, that's basically a worst case scenario. They're not going to let them walk for nothing. They're going to do something at the trade deadline. But I think, the concern is always, well, are they going to get fair value? The return, what's that going to be like? You're trading away your Vezina winning goaltender and your number one attacking threat when it comes to like goal scoring and creativity. Obviously for the Jets, that's just very unpalatable, especially when your objective is to make the playoffs and get that revenue. That stuff is really important for the Jets, especially because, like I've said in previous podcasts, I know that they're bankrolled by one of the wealthiest individuals in Canada, but we know that when it comes to an actual operating budget, the Jets run a very tight ship. They're not a team that has as much room for error as a lot of other squads. The TV revenue isn't crazy, and so that in-seat in-arena attendance is pretty critical. And the Jets, they're not the kind of team that I think is going to be comfortable having Scheifele and Hellebuyck departing without clear replacements. And so this thing where they're trying to, slow walk that line and be very careful, I think poses pretty big risks. But the opportunity side of things is that assuming all of this pans out, right, and the Jets actually make the playoffs, they have a good run, and things are looking, up for the team, maybe everything kind of falls into place, and maybe Scheifele and Hellebuyck really think their long-term plans. Now, with Scheifele, I don't know if coming back is necessarily best for both sides. I feel like a change of scenery would do him good. I think it would just be maybe the right choice from an organizational standpoint, right? Because Mark, I think he's kind of had to bear the burden of a team that's lacked direction. He and Hellebuyck both have kind of had a lot of pressure put on their shoulders. And obviously, Hellebuyck, I think, has handled it really well. Scheifele, you've seen two versions of him. And, the second version that you saw of him, it made you ask some questions about what his future with Winnipeg was. And so I still think at the end of the day, if you're going to keep one of them or, I guess talk about keeping both of them, I'd still just go for Hellebuyck. I think that makes the most sense for what Winnipeg's plan is. Like I've said previously, it's not what I would do personally. But, this season is interesting because I feel like there's a lot of upheaval around the NHL. The Jets have a legit chance to be near the top of the Central this year. This division is not going to be that strong. Minnesota and Colorado are probably the two teams that represent the stronger squads in this division. Other than that, though, it's pretty wide open. You've got the Blues, who probably aren't going to be that great. You've got the Preds, who are rebuilding. Chicago rebuilding, Arizona rebuilding. So for me, I look at this division and I feel like the Jets have a really good chance to finish top three, and they're probably going to need to if they want to make the postseason, because based on how the Pacific is starting to shape up, I really feel like one or two of those wildcard spots are going to that division. I just feel like the quality overall is at a level to where the Jets are going to have to try and get in those top three spots in the Central if they want to avoid having to fend off maybe a team like Calgary or something, or Edmonton, one of those squads that kind of is decent enough to be at or near the top of the Pacific, but ends up falling outside of the top three, and the Jets are forced to compete with them. So let's hope Winnipeg has a big year. This is a really good opportunity for them to, look, like I've said, going on runs right now, it's not ideal, but if you're going to do it, go all in, be really committed, and maybe we'll all have some fun here in a few months once the Jets are in a comfortable playoff spot. But Maybe things go crazy. Maybe they go awry. I don't know. I can't predict the future with this team. It's a bit of a uncertain future for the Jets, but I'm just hoping that it comes up positive. I think it'd be nice if we had a year where there was no, almost no drama. The team is gelling, is really clicking along, and kind of has that 17-18 vibe where we were just ready for everything and hoping for a cup at the end of it. But speaking of, preparing for the season, I did want to do some player previews, kind of get those underway as the Jets are nearing the start of preseason. We've already come up upon Penticton Young Stars this upcoming weekend. So let's start off with player previews for this year in just a moment. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you for joining us in these closing thoughts of tonight's episode as we dive into some player previews and stuff. Obviously, the Jets, it's been a strange offseason, but Winnipeg has a number of new arrivals, and I think it's interesting to consider how they're going to shape Winnipeg's season and how they're going to perform for Winnipeg itself. But let's start off with one of the most talked about Jets for obvious reasons, Mark Scheifele. What can we expect from him this season? For me, Mark, I think, is a guy who's going to kind of hit like 100-plus points easily, which is funny because obviously nothing that he does is easy. It's just that he's so good at what he does and so creative, either at even strength or on the power play, that I feel like Mark is going to have, 35-plus goals and, 65-plus assists without even breaking a sweat. He's just that good, and I think that's one of the reasons why if he were to be resigned in all this, I really wouldn't be upset. Obviously, I think there is a separation that should happen for the benefit of both parties. But like I said, I'm not going to get mad if he comes back for a couple of years and, maybe the Jets give him a bigger contract to convince him to stay while they figure out their longer-term plans. But make no mistake, Scheifele, he's going to rake it in. He's going to have better supporting talent. He's going to have guys who probably think on his wavelength in terms of positioning and stuff. And I feel like this year is primed for Mark to really, if he buys into it, take off. Now, I'm just hoping that he has a way to finish the season with Winnipeg because this team is just better with him on it. Obviously, that might not be the best asset choice. It's really going to come down to what he views his future with the Jets as, whether it's wanting to find greener pastures elsewhere or stick around for the long haul and see if he can't try and make this team a more competitive playoff threat. Now, like I said, I do think 100-plus points is going to be relatively straightforward for him. I just feel like with the way the rules are moving for the NHL and the recent uptick in scoring, I think this is primed to be a big season. For Gabe Vilardi, I think it's another interesting question. Vilardi is kind of an unknown for some Jets fans. And honestly, even for Kings fans, he was a little bit of an unknown just because, the first run for the Kings, he had some inconsistencies. And then, of course, he was fending off injuries and stuff. So we've only had a very short sample to see what he's really capable of. I think with the Jets, it's not inconceivable that he hits 70-plus points. I think like a 35 kind of season would be very realistic. I think he'll do it, very effectively. I think he'll be a menace on the power play because he's got that big, strong frame. I think he'll be happy to either glide in towards the net or maybe tip deflections. I think he's got great passing, great vision. His skating is very strong. He's got a nasty release, and he's super smart when it comes to positioning himself on really good angles towards the net. So for me, I feel like he's just, a question of staying healthy. I think he's a prime breakout candidate this season. He's going to be on a pretty deep Jets team where he's going to have some legit talent to work with. Now, that's assuming that Bones arranges the top 9 in a way that favors Vilardi's skill. If he plays with like a Perfetti, that would be really interesting to me. I think, if you were to do like, say, the top line of Connor, Scheifele, and Ehlers, that's an interesting trio. It's probably not the best way to do it. You could say that Perfetti, Scheifele, and Ehlers might be a dominant unit. And then if you have like a second line, maybe you go with Connor, Vilardi, and Iafallo or something. I mean, there's so many ways to arrange this trio, both the first and second lines. And that's before you even talk about throwing in Niederreiter, who last year was kind of on a heater for the Jets. So all I could say is with the amount of scoring talent Winnipeg is likely to add this year and general like skill up and down the lineup, I feel like Vilardi should be in a pretty insulated environment to really take off and also show the Jets why, it might be painful in a couple of years when he's up for an extension. But hey, if it's painful in a few years, it's because he's doing a darn fine job in a Jets uniform. So let's just hope it actually pays off and he gets the Jets one step closer to a cup. Now, throughout the rest of this week and probably beyond, we'll be doing even more player previews and stuff, expectations for the season, what I'm hoping to see, and kind of a revisit of that, plus maybe some fan sentiments from some polls and stuff that we do later on. But for tonight's show, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Like I said, you can find us on social media at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter/X. I still call it Twitter. Sorry. Force a habit. And of course, all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and like. But as always, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night and go Jets go.